Hi, I'm Peter Reynolds, and welcome to Pros and Conversations, the podcast that explores what it's like to be successful, or what it takes to be successful, I should say, from whether you're from the world of business, science, or the arts. Now, normally I would do a retake on that intro, but part of this episode is talking about mental health and some of the things that affect us entrepreneurs, like perfectionism. So I am not going to redo it, and we're going to jump right into this podcast. And to join me, as always, is my co-host, Damon Adachi, and he is a marketing consultant with Sevenfold Marketing. How you doing, Damon?
I'm good. I'm a little more nervous now that I know we're flying without a net, but I'm excited to be doing this. We've got a great guest, and I'm pretty jazzed to be the Hobbes to your Calvin today.
Yeah, no edits, no cuts, straight through. It's a little scary, but I think we're going to be stronger for it by the end. Yeah, today I thought, it would be great to talk about mental health. It's a subject that a lot of people are talking about. Here in Canada, we have Bell Let's Talk Day. It's becoming a lot easier to talk about it. I think that the stigma is starting to sort of ebb away for people. And it occurred to me, and I know you and I have talked about this, Damon, the idea that maybe entrepreneurs are particularly susceptible to some of the issues surrounding mental health.
There's just a lot of pressure, and you're embarking on trying to follow your dreams, and there's so much pressure to be successful. The concept of saying I failed at this is daunting. It's huge. So there's a lot on your shoulders. Not even mentioning trying to be fiscally supportive to your family and all those things. So sometimes it's tough being a one-man show, one-woman show, and trying to manage all of that on your own as well. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that the numbers are higher for entrepreneurs and solo business practitioners.
Well, thank goodness we're not alone, in this journey. We have with us a fantastic guest, and we have Shannon Moyer, who is a trauma specialist and support specialist and the founder of Moyer & Company. Shannon, welcome to Pros and Conversations.
Thanks for having me.
Shannon, let's jump right into it. And what do you think of this idea that maybe entrepreneurs are particularly susceptible to issues surrounding mental health?
I think that it is such an important thing that we start talking about because as solo practitioners, as entrepreneurs, we take on all of the tasks, all of the roles, which leads to one massive thing that I don't think really gets considered as a mental health crisis or condition, and that's burnout. Entrepreneurs are so susceptible to it. When was the last time you actually kept to your office hours? When was the last time you actually turned on your autoresponder and turned everything off to balance out that work-life dynamic that we are so bad at balancing? We put ourselves naturally on the back burner because often when you're an entrepreneur, you're the doer. You're the one with the plan, the dream, you're going, you're doing, you're building the things. And there's nobody who's going to do it quite like you can. So you take on all of those roles, you put your own self-care on the back burner, and all of a sudden your candle has completely extinguished and you have no idea how to pick up those pieces. But what would happen if you actually had those autoresponders on? If you had strong boundaries, if you had office hours and could balance those things out so that your mental health at the end of the day, because that's really what you're left with at the end of the day. If we had those systems, it would be so much easier.
Yeah, I think there's this, this idea, maybe it's sort of an internal narrative, that we have to pay for our success, and that, the stress that we feel, the time away from our family, that's the price we pay, to have that success. And I think it's a broken narrative.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree with you. It's not serving anybody in any practical or positive way. And there are so many pieces of fragmentation at the end of it. Our family life becomes frayed. Our relationships become frayed. What happens at 10 p.m.? Well, you shut everything off and you become recluse and you end up with another layer of mental health, which is isolation.
Yeah, I would say that what I've had to learn to do is what what the benefit of working for somebody else is you can almost leave it at the office sometimes. You can shut it off and leave it there. It's really hard to do when it's your livelihood and when it's everything for you. And you don't get to schedule these things. And when you get busy with work, life gets busy on the other side of things at the same time, more often than not. And, it's hard to say no to things because you want to be present in both sides of the line. But I've had to learn to say, at this time of the day, there's nothing I can do to change what's going to happen tomorrow. So I have to shut it off and walk away from it. And that's been a huge learning curve for my mental health.
That's an awesome approach to it, though.
But it's a badge of honor too, right?
Yeah,
There's this badge of honor of working through a weekend. There's this badge of honor of not taking a vacation. And I know I tell a story, and it's interesting to, even in just having this discussion now, it's making me rethink it. But I would tell a story of when I first was dating my wife. And that first year, I got a call from the Romanian consulate, and they wanted me to film their New Year's party, their New Year's Eve party. And I was so excited. I'm starting in the business. Any job's a great job. This was good money. It was going to be fun. And I told my wife, super excited look on my face. And she looks at me and goes, "Oh, so we're not spending New Year's Eve together this year?" And it never occurred to me because I'd never really been in a long-term relationship, something where, the idea of not working, if someone called, I worked. And the holidays were usually the best times to work. But what I did as a freelancer is I brought her with me, and she was my camera assistant. And we had
romantic.
We had a fantastic time. It was different for her. She'd never experienced that. It was fun. We have a good story. But looking back on it, I realize, I didn't have the ability to say no back then. Now I'm at a point in my business where I would say, no, I can't shoot New Year's Eve. We've got plans, or I can't shoot Christmas Day. I have plans. But that took a lot of years to be able to say no.
And it takes some more security in the business to be able to walk away from work. So Shannon, would you say that the stresses of being as an entrepreneur, business owner, they get better over time as your stability increases, or is it just it ramps up in levels?
I think because we have two entrepreneurs in our home. And one is a workaholic, and that is not me. I very mindfully craft time that is just mine. I take every single Friday off to just do my stuff because if you pile too much on, you're going to be letting somebody down in some fashion. It's either going to be your family, or it's going to be that client that you didn't get back to right away, or the new inquiry that came in that expected a response, because we also live in a society that is very much on instant gratification. And we've become accustomed to having those instant answers from entrepreneurs all the time. So if there's a 24-hour waiting period, we almost feel jilted by that business owner. So you're always going to be letting somebody down. If you have strong boundaries, if you're able to really go into your business, establishing them, solidifying them, and keeping to them, it's way easier than having to establish them when you're later down the road. So I would almost say to a new entrepreneur, what do you want out of this? How much time do you really want to be putting into this? And how much time is kind of that flex time that can be navigated as needed. But you have to start with boundaries. You have to, because it's really hard when people get into the habit of getting that instant answer from you, getting that report. They know they're going to get the email from you at 11:05 p.m. because you're that person. They know they can depend on that. It's harder to change those boundaries later.
Yeah, very interesting when you talk about talking to a new entrepreneur, because Peter and I have had the discussion that one of the pitfalls that people fall into with owning your own practice or business is that you think, I will work harder. I will put in more hours and that will equal success. And not only does it have very little guarantee that it's going to be greater success, it is way harder on you, and the burnout factor that you mentioned earlier. So the concept of crafting time is brilliant. And I could see Peter's eyes light up at the same time when I heard that term, because it's a concept that people can root around and feel like, yes, I have to be strategic with time. I have to think about it in advance and plan for it and stick to those boundaries. So that's an incredible tidbit for people to walk away from in this conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and we've had this conversation a number of times, Damon, that working harder, working more hours, you hear this often where someone says, I might not be the smartest person in the room, but I'm the hardest worker. I will put in those hours. You might be more talented in a particular area, but I'm going to put in those hours to make sure I'm there before you, I'm there after you, and that's how I'm going to achieve success. And it's interesting because it seems that that's the only, entrepreneurship and business seems to be one of the only fields where that's a factor. And I was listening to another TED Talk with a gentleman by the name of Phil Drolet, and he's a former competitive swimmer, and he's also a peak performance coach. And he says, look at other areas where you have peak performers. Okay, so you look at sports. For example, they'll have the preseason, they'll have the regular season, they'll have the playoffs, and then they'll have the off season where they take 4 months off to rest and recuperate. If entrepreneurs did that, you'd think we were crazy. What, you're not putting in 100 hours a week, every week, never stopping. So it's interesting how, we think that's the only road to success when it's not.
Yeah, it's true. And being an entrepreneur, it's abstract, right? Like a lot of us, and I think the pandemic has really highlighted that for people, the lack of balance because of the lack of separation of space. A lot of us don't have that brick and mortar space to go to run your business out of, where naturally, like Damon said before, you leave work and work stays there. But if you're working from the kitchen table or the island or your home office even, where's the separation of space? Everything is intertwined. And then all of a sudden, like the loss of identity when you become an entrepreneur, because that is everything of who you are, you lose yourself. And then you lose the joy that brought you to creating that business in the first place.
Yeah, it's like you're looking into my soul. No, I completely relate to what you're saying. And you can't, I think it would be great to say, I'm going to turn on the computer at 8 o'clock and I'm going to turn it off at 5 o'clock and that's going to be my work day. It doesn't work like that. And you really do have to try to enforce boundaries. But I think, like tying it all together in a sense, you talked about the badge of honor, Peter, and that's the stigma part that we got to get away from. And yes, it's easier for us now to say, you know what, I'm having a bad day, which was hard to say 10, 20 years ago, right? Like I need a me day. I need to get away from this. That was harder to say before. But we really have to say, like if your determination that you're so proud of as a business owner goes into being more structured and more aware and carving out those identities and crafting time, that's a harder struggle than just, putting in hours. It's putting in smart hours and working smarter rather than harder. So, we should be able to say, like, let's revel in the fact that the stigma is dissipating from the mental health issues and saying, I'm struggling. That was always hard to say. Now let's, focus on how do we do it better in ways that makes it easier and be okay with the fact that, it's hard and it's okay to try and make it easier and then just, putting your nose to the grindstone and burning yourself out.
Shannon, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the stigma and maybe get at the root of it if we could, because I know, generally speaking, this idea of, having a mental health issue, suffering from anxiety or depression, can be seen as weakness, and obviously people don't want to be seen as weak, generally speaking, but particularly as entrepreneurs, we're the heart and soul of our business. We're the engine of our business. If we're not operating at peak proficiency. If we're perceived as weak or somebody who can't put in that 100-hour week, I think a lot of us would say that doesn't look good to our customers. That doesn't look good to our investors. It's like, well, if this person had to take a mental health day or can't work on weekends, maybe there's another company out there that can.
Mm-hmm. I think we need to return to this notion that we're human beings first, and then we have businesses, and then we are partners, and then we are parents, and then we are friends. We need to be human beings first. And in being human, part of that lived experience is tackling trauma, tackling our upbringing, tackling our mental health. And we have been raised in this society where we don't want to make anybody else feel uncomfortable because that leaves them feeling vulnerable. And that's really sticky situations and messy waters to get into. But what would happen if we just openly said, not I'm struggling, I'm human and this is hard? Creating a conversation. I am a very transparent person as a counselor in my practice. I always tell my clients, there's no question that's off the table. If you want to know something about what I've been through, just ask and I will tell you. And that is very uncommon in the mental health spaces for the practitioner to then say, yeah, I've been through some stuff too. We're almost trained to take the human out of it when really there's so much relatability and trust that can be established if we put the human back in. And if we treat each other as human beings first, and then say, so Peter, what do you do on a daily basis? How's your business going? But get to know the person first, creates those conversations, and then breaks down those stigmas that we've been raised with from our parents who were likely raised by relatively emotionally unintelligent people, and in a society that was children are meant to be seen and not heard, speak when spoken to. We don't talk about emotions, good or bad. We just don't, because it's uncomfortable. But there's so much connection that can happen if we just talk about it openly. And then people don't feel like they're alone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I'd found that earlier on in my business, there were certain clients that I could be more human with and more transparent with, and other clients that had no interest in that. Mm-hmm. And they were just about, I need deliverables. And then you can sort of prioritize and say, all right, I can have that talk with this client. I can't have that talk with that client. And then eventually you say, I don't want that client anymore at all. Mm-hmm. And that's how you strengthen your business for not only the way you service them, but the way you service yourself, and make sure that you can continue to be the best you at your job. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And I sort of felt that I was leaning that way when I talked about that, the humanizing of things. Mm-hmm. And that's what's great about, how far we've come. But there's still a lot of stigma, I would say, around mental health. And to Peter's point about admitting weakness and saying, I can't, mm-hmm. Or I'm struggling, or this is hard. But we're getting there. Do you think that it continues to get better? Do you think that Bell has helped in that sense, or have people started to say, all right, that's been there, done that thing. What's next?
I think there's a lot of pressure on this generation of human beings that we're all kind of collectively raising right now, but there's a lot of beauty in the generation that's coming up behind us. I'm going to be 40 in a few months. I've got a 12-year-old and an almost 8-year-old. And the fact that my kids will express when they need a day off because something's hard, the fact that they will come to me and say, I'm feeling all these emotions and I need to label them. We're raising this beautiful generation of human beings that's going to come into these spaces, into workspaces, into entrepreneurship, openly already talking about their mental health. I think we are going to see so much change because of how they're coming up. We're this, the 30, 40, 50-year-olds, we're dealing with all of the trauma. We're dealing with all of the stigma and all the mental health and trying to break those barriers. But in doing that, we're leading by the example for our kids that it's okay to take a mental health day from school. I've got one of them home today because he needs a day, and that's okay. We need to start giving ourselves permission to be able to do that so that they see those examples and follow in that and then become leaders of that change.
Absolutely. I mean, that's very well said. That human element, the being humans first, and trying to connect, even though we have business relationships, trying to connect on a human level. I think it's good for business.
Absolutely.
If you have that personal connection with someone, if you feel comfortable enough with a client to tell them a family member is sick or a child is sick and it's a little bit much, and you don't have to lie, or you don't have to make something up, to be able to be honest with them that it's going to take another day for me to get that to you. If you have that kind of relationship, that can only be a stronger, business relationship. You have that personal connection. I know for myself, one of the challenges when I was living with anxiety was that it was, there was the anxiety I was feeling, and then there was the not letting people know that I was feeling anxiety, the anxious about being anxious.
It's exhausting.
It's absolutely exhausting. And it wasn't until I spoke with somebody who actually used those words, this idea of sort of name it to tame it, that they said, it's stressing you out to not tell people. So if you're at a dinner party and you're feeling a little anxious, let people know. And then that part of it will fall away. And you always have this sort of fear. I don't know what's going through your mind. You think, well, work's been really difficult and I'm feeling a bit anxious, just to let you know. And you think they're going to say, get out.
Yeah.
That never happens. People are always very understanding, and they say, and more often than not, I totally get it. Oh my gosh, sometimes I just need to close the door of my office and I just need like 30 minutes. I just need to meditate. It's, so I think there's a lot of empathy out there. We just have to find it, and sort of be brave enough to let people know, and then it will return to us.
Totally. I always tell clients, when I'm sharing my story, or people on social media or whatever, I'm talking to one person at a time. And my hope is that one person hears the story, sees themselves in it, and then gives themselves the permission to be that bravely vulnerable, to say, hey, I need help and something happened to me too. And it just opens up this beautiful door of conversation, because we're human beings.
We hope you're enjoying this episode so far. Pros and Conversations is brought to you by For the Record Productions, providing video production services to corporate and nonprofit clients for over 20 years. To learn more about how we can help your business, visit videosthatmatter.ca. And by the Business Alliance, a professional peer group that helps you grow your business through networking, collaboration, and sound advice. To learn more about how to become a member, visit jointhealliance.biz.
It's funny, in our networking group that Peter and I belong to, once in a while we have a check-in meeting where it's just, what's going on with you? What are you struggling with? What's your challenge right now? And it's been refreshing to see that people will say, you know what? Like, there's one member who will say, I know every year I have a 2-week period where I'm just down, and it's a little mini depression, and I ride it out, and I know it gets better, and I remove myself from work and I deal with it there. And it's been refreshing to know that you can share those things, and you have a forum of people who will give you that positive reinforcement, empathy, and connection. And it's funny that some of our members say, I dabble in stress because that comes with the territory. I do have a level of anxiety because I'm responsible for breadwinning and for keeping this positive. But anxiety is just a human condition as well. It's not a bad word. It's not a necessarily evil thing. But it's that when you fall so far down into, feeling this malaise and I can't do this and I need to, just kind of fall down a little bit. Do you have tips? Do you have experience? Do you have commentary about how you stop going that far down the path of negativity, that you can just ride out the anxiety and deal with the stress?
Oh, do I have tips? So while both of you are talking, all I'm thinking is, oh my gosh, emotional mapping would be so helpful for this. Because really, it's not the anxiety or the stress or the burnout that's the problem. That's not where the energy and the healing and the attention needs to go. It's all of the roots and all of the connections and attachments that all of that is born from. So one of the biggest tools that I use in my practice is something called emotional mapping. And if you've been in high school or post-secondary school, it really looks like a spiderweb brainstorming sheet where you draw a circle in the center of a page, you label, name it to tame it, right? You label what it is that you're dealing with, and then you draw all of your connections on the outside. And then in a non-emotionally attached way, because they're just words on a page, you take a step back and you look at it and say, okay, what of these things feels really big? And you circle them. And you say, what of these things feels like it's okay now that I've validated it and written it down and given it somewhere to live that isn't inside of my body anymore? And then when you look at the ones that are really big, that's where you can put the healing and the attention. That's where you can then focus your energy and say, okay, there's a bigger story there, because that one thing about judgment and fear of failure is actually born from my childhood and is attached to pressure to perform at a high level in collegiate sports, for example. Something like that. And then you can really get down to core beliefs, because that's where a lot of the mental health stems from, is your core beliefs and your foundation of self.
I'm in awe. But I also hear like there's a high degree of self-awareness needed for that. And I'm sure that that's how you can help people with your coaching and with your counseling to be able to hold up the mirror, I guess, a little bit and help them identify those things.
Yeah, it's a lot of uncomfortable, messy work that we end up doing. And it's really difficult. And there's not a lot of counselors that I find do this quite the same approach, because it's a lot. And I've been on the other side of the couch. And I tell my clients this, I've been there where you get a high five on your way out the door and it's like, see you in 2 weeks and away you go. But the more impactful work actually happens in those 2 weeks between your sessions. So you need to have tools, you need to have mapping, you need to have de-escalation techniques with breath work and naming the things that you're going through, normalizing in this human experience that we all have a story. We all have things that we bring with us, whether we're an entrepreneur or not, that are going to impact those relationships and those social situations, and then impact our concept of self and our mental health. We have to start validating that so that we can show up in the truest expression of who we are.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as entrepreneurs, we put a lot of effort, into our businesses, and into all the elements related to our businesses, maybe forgetting, about our health, both our physical health, whether that's, eating healthy and exercising, getting enough sleep, to our mental health, where we need to put in that effort, because all of these things, whether it's your marketing strategy, Damon, or how you're dealing with anxiety, these are all the foundation, of your business. This is what's holding your business up. And if one of them fails, we know if your marketing plan fails, the business fails. If your sales plan fails, your business can fail. But if you don't have the tools to handle stress, to recognize when sadness is more than sadness, when you don't have those tools, how can your business succeed?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've heard you say you live in a two entrepreneur household, and I think that it sort of highlights to me that, having somebody like yourself in your corner as an entrepreneur, great. You've got somebody who can give you that awareness and make you be present in the moment. But your real partner, if it's not your business partner, if it's not somebody who's on the front lines with you, your backup partner in your household has to carry a lot of that burden and weight. So that can lead to other issues beyond just your own mental health. It can lead to relationship problems. And I think Peter and I are both shining examples of people who have found the perfect partner to keep us successful in business. But speak to that for a moment, because that's a huge challenge as well.
It is a huge challenge. And again, they're human beings going through their own lived experience. We have experienced an incredible amount of anxiety and depression and grief in our home over the past year. And there comes a time where the entrepreneur hat has to go away and you just have to be the partner. And I know it probably drives my family nuts where I'm like, how are you feeling? Can you name that? Where do you feel it in your body? What color is it? I'm sure it drives them insane when I start pulling out all of the tools, but there's a reason for that. And it always comes from a place of, I want you to be okay, but I want you to feel supported in that. And if we need to explore whatever tools I have or other tools that other practitioners have, let's just get you on a track where you feel good and you feel grounded and you feel safe so that you can start talking about it. I work with a lot of people who are in partnerships and feel super disconnected from their partners. And the biggest thing that I recommend to them is having a shared communication journal. Because when you have verbal communication with your partner, it can escalate and go to a whole other galaxy, and you didn't even intend for it to go there. And all of a sudden, the root of what was happening is completely lost. But if you can write it down, again, they're just words on a page, and you can speak from a place of I. We have to advocate for ourselves and our needs, and we can't expect the people that live with us and cohabitate with us to read into that, to read into our minds and just inherently know. We have to show up and be an active participant, and having a shared communication journal gives a non-judgmental space for those words to be housed. Then you leave it in a specific spot, and your partner then just knows, if it's there, I need to go read it. And then if there's something big that gets mentioned, you can sit down and have a chat about it. But not everything has to be a big discussion. And sometimes you just need to write it out for somebody to read it and say, hey, I got your note. That sounds really heavy. If you want to talk, I'm here for you. We need support, not fixing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's got to be one of the biggest challenges for partners and family members, is this idea that you recognize it in your loved one. You see them incredibly stressed. You see them, every day it seems to be getting worse. But when they come home and they sit down on the couch, they turn on the television, the last thing you want to do is bring it up and add to their stress, and suggest things. So you say nothing and you walk around on eggshells. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering what advice you might give for the family members out there, the partners, who are recognizing it but don't know what to do.
If you're seeing your partner or family member, friend, whomever, whatever your connection is to this human, if you're seeing them bury themselves in work because unfortunately being busy can be a sign of dissociation, because you don't want to deal with all the reality of all of the things. So we're just going to be completely consumed by this one thing. If you start seeing things like that, if they are unable to take a step back or have a fun day because they're so consumed by work, I have written my spouse so many emails, so many letters. Sometimes it's just a point form list of like, this is what I notice is happening, and here's some tools that could help you. And I just slip it to them. And he can do with it as he wants, because he's an adult, grown human being who can make decisions for himself. But know that there's impact and there's consequences and there's rewards to those decisions depending on how they want to approach it. But I think being aware of, like you said, when sadness isn't just sadness anymore. When you talked about the person from your networking group who has that 2 weeks of sad, all I'm thinking is, okay, but what happened in those 2 weeks? Where is the timestamp in their brain to say that this 2 weeks is particularly hard? What happened? What's the story there? I know our partners don't necessarily want to talk about all of the things. And it's particularly difficult for male presenting human beings to talk about these things too. But it's really important. It's really, really important to get them talking. And if it starts by a written conversation, that's a little less threatening than having to sit down over dinner and talk about all of the things.
Great advice.
It's interesting. When I was doing a bit of research, I think we've talked about this idea of feeling alone, of feeling it's only happening to me. All the other entrepreneurs out there are incredibly successful in handling it. And, it's sort of that Facebook.
It's the highlight
model.
reel that we see from everyone.
Yeah. And we have to and everyone, oh my God, everyone's doing what? They're coming out with new books and they opened up a new office, and what the heck? What am I doing? And I was doing just sort of a bit of research, and just to give a sense of the fact how sort of widespread this is. There was a recent study out of the University of San Francisco, and they were saying that startup founders are twice as likely to suffer from depression, 6 times more likely to suffer from ADHD, 3 times more likely to suffer from substance abuse, 10 times more likely to suffer from bipolar disorder, twice as likely to have a psychiatric hospitalization, and twice as likely to have suicidal thoughts. So we're not alone.
Mm-mm. And if you think about going to the gym or going to the beach, everybody's so hyper focused on, oh, how do I look? And am I lifting heavy enough? Or is that person judging me over there? Everybody is thinking about themselves. Nobody's thinking and judging all of the other human beings around them. We're all hyper focused because we all have this insecurity that we aren't enough. And there's a measure of worth in those weekend hours that we pull to get that report done. And really, the measure of worth is, how are you prioritizing yourself every day? I'm a huge advocate for healthy detachment. And people hear the word detachment and think, oh, you're putting up boundaries and you're becoming disengaged. And really, it's not. At the heart of healthy detachment, it's prioritization of self. You're the only person who can be an active participant in your life for yourself. You're the only person who can do those things and show up for yourself. My dad always would say to me, you got to look out for number 1, because you're the only person who can show up for you. You're the only person who's responsible for you. You have to do that work and prioritize yourself every single day. I show up every morning. I get my kids off to the bus. I come home and I do a Peloton ride every single morning because the music fills me with joy. And all of a sudden I've done this workout and I feel great about what I've done. And then I can continue. And it allows me to show up for my clients in such a better, more mindful way because I have put myself first. And we live in a society that would say, oh, that's really selfish. When really it's like, no, I'm doing it because I matter.
Right.
And that's not wrong.
Exactly. And that relates all the way back to not letting clients force you to work outside your boundaries and do those things. And it's all core supporting, and that's fantastic. Wow.
Shannon, perhaps for people listening, you could tell just a little bit about your business, and about where they might be able to find you.
Well, it's pretty easy. It's Moyer and Co. Moyer, not Moir. And Co. on pretty much every social media avenue. And moyerandco.com. I'm a counselor and a trauma support specialist. I have a little bit of a different perspective because of my lived experience. I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2018. After a history of assaults and abuse in the home. My father passed away in 2005, postpartum psychosis after our first birth, all of these things that I just thought were normal things that people go through. They are totally not normal things that people go through. And when my husband and I were in couples therapy to kind of navigate family dynamics, our therapist looked at us and I was really agitated and I was a birth doula for a long time. And I actually took on a lot of high risk cases. So really traumatic situations. And watching people go through that, there's a little thing called vicarious trauma. So I kind of piled all of that on, and she looked at me and said, you know, you have PTSD, right? I was like, oh, is that what that's called? I thought I was just like a rageaholic. I didn't know that was a thing. So then I did the therapy and I did the research, and there's a huge misconception with PTSD that it's a mental health issue. And it's not. It's an injury to your brain. Your brain has fragmented memories and emotional associations. And now you live with the symptoms of trauma. But similarly to how you would wrap a sprained ankle or get surgery on an Achilles or whatever and do all of the rehab, you can do that and fix your brain. So I did all of that work. Was released of my diagnosis in July 2019. And I thought, okay, there's got to be something bigger here. There has to be a reason that I've gone through all of this stuff and done the work. What can I do now? How can I help people now? And I've done that by building these tools and emotion and help people establish their own emotional toolkit for processing what they've been through, healing what they've been through, and then applying those tools to their daily life so that they can de-escalate at a moment's notice. My goal is always for a client to never come back. It's not a lifelong thing. And a lot of therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists treat that relationship like it's a lifelong thing. But if you have the tools and you use the tools consistently, you're fine. You're just a human having a human experience. So why don't we normalize that and build some tools around that?
Fascinating. I have to tell you that I'm fairly green in the podcast space, and yours was the first one I ever listened to.
Really?
And it's probably not meant for me because it's very much a different demographic that you're targeting. But it's excellent, very entertaining to listen to you and your co-host. And I also saw something about a new book.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So when I was going through trauma therapy, one of the things that I did, my sessions were biweekly, which is what I suggest my clients do, because the impactful work happens in the time between sessions. What I did, I've been writing poetry since I was probably 10 years old. And it helped me process all of the stuff, all of the memories, all of the grief. So I turned it into a book. And the first one was called The Years of Breaking because it was about all of the trauma that broke me. Then there's a second one, which is getting released on June 30th. So next, in a week, which feels very strange.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's called Of Coming Home because it's about the reclaiming process. After you've done the breaking, what do you do now? Well, you can either lay there in the rubble or you can build this beautiful new foundation and rise above everything that you've been handed. So that's what the second one is about. Then there will be a third one that is about like rising above all of it and establishing your concept of self based on your own determination.
Because everybody loves the trilogy.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah.
So now we're going to turn this on Peter. And now tell us, Peter, is your writing the way that you deal with your stress? Shannon, please consult.
Probably. You know what? There's no question. I mean, I write stories for children. I write poetry for children, as well as middle grade novellas. What's wonderful about that is that it has nothing to do with business. And it has been really enjoyable doing it over the last 5 years because my hobbies and my business have always matched. So I really enjoy, like I shoot video for a living, so that's my day in, day out. But I also enjoy video and I've always enjoyed it. So I will do time-lapse photography for fun, or I'll do portrait photography for fun. But it was always connected. So in some ways I was never off. Like even when I was doing a hobby, I was still thinking about the business.
Right.
Ooh, I'm going to bring my drone out and shoot some stuff, but I'm still not off the clock. And writing, I am off the clock. There is no connection to my business whatsoever. It is just purely fun. So yes, that's absolutely a de-stressor. And I think, maybe you could speak to that a little bit. This idea of having hobbies, the power of the hobby that has nothing to do with your business.
Yeah. Well, like I said, when we become entrepreneurs, our whole identity is what our business is. And it's similar to getting in a relationship or becoming a first-time parent. The amount of first-time parents I see in my clinic who are like, I don't like being a mom. I don't want to play at the park with my kids. I don't want to sit down and play Hot Wheels. I'm a boy mom, so everything's like boy-centric around here. But your identity is so much more than your business or so much more than being a parent. I have been a runner for years until I got significantly injured. So now those workouts, it's that healthy detachment, right? We have to create that time in those spaces. And it doesn't have to make a lick of sense to anyone. If it fills you with joy and makes you happy and gives you that sense of accomplishment and pride, not related to business, not related to family, there's worth there. So you have to create those things, and they're allowed to change too. Just because you were a runner doesn't mean you can't be a cyclist now. Just because you were a cyclist then doesn't mean you can't get into doing triathlons. You can do literally anything you believe you can. And the trickle-down effect from that is you show all of the people that you cohabitate space with that they can do that too.
I'd actually say the more it doesn't make sense, the more seemingly insignificant it is, the better it is. Because as entrepreneurs, our minds are always working. We're always thinking about what's the next product, what's the next service, what's the next idea. My wife doesn't even want to hear my ideas anymore. I go, oh my God, I just thought, Peter, I know you came up with a really cool product idea. I don't want to hear it right now. Okay,
yeah, your stat about a lot of entrepreneurs having ADHD, that was before they became entrepreneurs. That's why they became entrepreneurs. That's not a result of it.
Well, and when you talked about the statistic with addiction and suicidal ideation, like that goes right into neurodiversity within the ADHD realm too, because you're constantly chasing the dopamine. That's why that happens. So being the entrepreneur who's always thinking of the next thing, it's because you want the dopamine rush of the new.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll do something where I'll show these little models, okay? They're utterly ridiculous little plastic models that I get from Japan, and there's no value whatsoever except it's fun to do. And I just sit there and do it.
That's huge value.
Yeah, you're right. To the outside world, maybe. But you're right. To me, it's just fun to do. It's a little de-stressor. And I think the more that we can kind of look for those things, I think it's just going to, it can only make us stronger.
Absolutely. We have to build those things as habits, like that cultivating time, creating those time spaces where those things become priorities, because there's something that gives us worth and fulfilling, and there's value there that feeds our human soul, not connected to being an entrepreneur.
Well, speaking of fun, this has been fantastic. We asked for a little bit of your time and we took a lot of it. So
that's okay. It's my day off. It's my day off today. I can give you all the time in the world.
It's been extremely enlightening. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you.
We have been speaking with Shannon Moyer, who is a trauma and support specialist and founder of Moyer and Company. And also joining us today is someone who I only feel anxious if they're not here, and that is Damon Adachi, and he is a marketing consultant with Sevenfold Marketing. And before we go, I just wanted to say that really, if you're listening to this and perhaps you recognize yourself, or you recognize someone else in your life who might be suffering from anxiety or depression, there's absolutely no stigma in reaching out and trying to get help. And there's lots of opportunities to get help out there. The Canada.ca website has free, confidential mental health and substance abuse support. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from Wellness Together Canada. And for those people watching it on YouTube, I'm going to put all the information up there, but it'll also be in the description. But if you need to talk to a mental health professional, you can call 1-866-585-0445. And remember, as entrepreneurs, we're always getting expert help and advice, whether it's graphic design, whether it's accounting, web design. We have no problem reaching out for that kind of help. There's absolutely no problem reaching out for help with your own mental well-being. I'm Peter Reynolds. You've been listening to Pros and Conversations. Thanks for listening.